Okay. So trade credit, I always have to have at least some slide with most of my colleagues. Raghu Rajan, who's now chair of the Central Bank of India, and Mitch Petersen was previously at Northwestern University. They wrote a paper in 1997 talking about trade credit and really how important it was, and saying that trade credit is the single most important source of short-term external finance in the United States and actually around the world. It corresponds to 15% of all assets, whereas debt, short-term debt, like short-term bank debt, is only about 7%. I'm going to look a little bit at some of the CompuStat data for North America, and particularly for retailers, since they're just at one end of the supply chain. And if we look at them, we see that they have inventory as their major asset, and that kind of makes sense for a retailer. 32% of their assets are held in inventory, and at the same time, they have about 15% in accounts payable. Now, if you look at accounts payable, this is what they owe to other firms, so this is what other firms have lent to them. This is the form of trade credit. And what you'll see is that trade credit is roughly proportional to the inventory that firms hold. So that approximately half of the inventory that a firm has at any one point in time is not paid for. That they're basically borrowing money for those items. Now, firms, even though they're borrowing, and these can be very big firms, they can be a firm like a Walmart, which has the highest credit rating of any retailer in the world, AAA credit rating. Walmart borrows from its suppliers $30 billion. So $30 billion of all the products that Walmart has at any point in time is what they owe to their suppliers. Now, most of the time, the suppliers are perfectly happy to provide Walmart with these products because they know that Walmart has such a great credit rating. They know that Walmart's going to pay them back. Walmart's not going to default. So they're perfectly willing to go ahead and actually lend to Walmart. And firms, even though they have 5% of their total asset base in cash, they still have, so Walmart, which has lots of resources, still finds an advantage in terms of basically borrowing from its suppliers. And current debt for retailers is pretty small, so it's only about 2%. So accounts payable, trade credit is a much bigger source than current debt. Now, of course, these firms are lending to Walmart. They basically think that that's risk-free. Walmart's not going to default, at least not anytime too soon. However, trade credit can be risky. There's several examples. I'll just talk about this one. Circuit City, which is a large electronic retailer in the United States. They filed for bankruptcy in 2008. At the time that they filed, they had $750 million in accounts payable. And their total liabilities, so they also had some long-term debt, but their total liabilities were $2.3 billion. And if you look at their 50 largest unsecured creditors, 48 of them were trade credit. Hewlett Packard, Samsung, and Sony, some of the large electronics manufacturers, were their biggest creditors in terms of trade credit. So in this case, basically that means that Hewlett Packard delivered $120 million worth of goods to Circuit City. Circuit City didn't pay them back. And because Hewlett Packard was an unsecured creditor and Circuit City was not able to actually pay even off on its long-term debt, those unsecured creditors received nothing in the final settlement. Okay, now trade credit sometimes appears to be very expensive. So here's a paper by Ng and al. Et al. From '99. It's usually, if you think of trade credit as being quoted the way it might be, or it could be interpreted, it appears to have a high implicit interest rate. So for example, 210 net 30 terms means that if you pay within 10 days, you get a 2% discount. Otherwise, you should pay everything in 30 days. That, if you think about what that works out to as an interest rate, it seems to be very high, especially when interest rates are quite low. And so why would any firm then not take advantage of the 10-day period? And on average, it seems that only about half firms take advantage of that. So why would most firms, or even those that get 210 net 30 kinds of funding, why would those firms do that? So Petersen and Rajan, again, they asked that question. It seems to be a very expensive substitute for going to a bank. You know, they go to a bank and probably get very, very low rates, whereas why would they in this case, go for something that would represent a very high rate? 2% over 10 days, that seems to be quite a high rate, or 2% over 20 days anyway, seems to be quite a high rate of interest. However, a lot of times, some of these studies, particularly one by Ng and also in Petersen and Rajan's study, they're based on surveys. And if you look at the survey, so Petersen and Rajan's paper said, and the survey, well, on average, the days of payable, the number of days of, let's say, sales that the accounts payable accounted for would have been something around 25.2. Now, if we work out that about half the firms in their study, 52%, were paying in 10 days, what that means is that the other firms had to have an average of 31.5 days. But if they had net 30, that means they had to pay off in 30 days. So it seems like something else is going on. So what else is going on is that even though we might see a contract that says 210 net 30, that means you absolutely have to pay me back in 30 days, firms actually stretch the terms of those contracts. And if a firm is always reliable in terms of its paying to its suppliers, often that term can be stretched out very far. So what looks like a very high rate of interest might be a much lower rate of interest in reality. So if we look at sort of the implementation of trade credit as opposed to what's actually written down, what we see is firms actually take advantage of much longer terms than what they might originally see. In fact, if we looked at it and if we assume even something like that 90% of firms are going to pay off within the 30-day period, and let's say just 10% take advantage of the discount available in the first 10 days. However, for all firms in this retail sample, the distribution looks something like this. So 10% is only getting you about 20 days worth of payables, and the 90th percentile is something around 82 days. So more than two times longer than the net period that we often see in contracts. And the median among retailers is something around 42 days. So even the median for retailers appears to be much longer than what you would think of as the general net terms. Now this is an important thing because it actually affects firms' performance. There was a PhD dissertation written last year that looked at French firms, particularly in the trucking industry, where there was legislation that they could not extend terms beyond 30 days. The effect of not extending terms beyond 30 days is that the trucking industry in France suffered. Trucking went down, prices went up, and other countries who were able to take advantage of that benefited to the tune that France actually took a hit in their entire domestic product just because of this restriction on trade credit within a single industry. Now, their motivation was good. The motivation there was, well, we want to protect the small trucking companies from these large companies that are able to extend credit. However, by protecting small companies, they were essentially enforcing that the inefficient producers would gain an advantage and that efficiency would be diminished, and ended up, again, with lower trucking overall, higher prices within that industry. So it does affect what goes on in the economy as well. Now, if I look at the firms, again, that even have more than 5% of their sales in terms of cash, it looks about the same. So it doesn't make any difference. As I said, Walmart is, Walmart is effectively right in the middle here. Walmart has about 45 days of payables, so that's what that $30 billion works out to for Walmart. And they obviously do not, they don't need, there's no financial, purely financial reason for them to have to go to use trade credit, but they do take advantage of it. So firms that have lots of cash also take advantage of trade credit. I've put down here firms in different industries just to show you how things vary across industries and within industries. So within an industry like the Circuit City example, electronics, 50%, the median is around 40 days, 3/4 of the firms, so the third quartile here is around 50 days, and the first quartile is around 30 days. So again, more than 25% are taking longer than the net 30 terms. And if I look at it in terms of medians across industries, we see one industry that's very low, that's motor vehicle and parts, and that's because motor vehicles work somewhat differently from other industries in that the manufacturer also has a financing arm. The manufacturer then finances directly to the dealers, so that when an automobile is shipped to a dealer, the dealer takes possession effectively immediately. However, what's just happening is that that's being transferred to the financial company. So although the ownership goes to the dealer, there's no cash transaction that's actually happened. It's just moved over to the financial part of the company. So it appears that they have low trade credit, but in reality, it's just done through their financial arm. There are some that are quite long. So, for example, furniture and home furnishings. The median is almost 2 months, 58 days. So it's almost twice as long as what we would think of as the general net terms, or twice as long as what is the restriction. Was the restriction in France for trucking companies, and which is being debated by the French legislature for all firms to make it less than 30 days. So you can imagine for all firms what this would mean for something where there's very long times in inventory, like in furniture, that this would have an impact on the French furniture industry. And we see some longer ones like sporting goods. Also has a very long inventory. Sporting goods, hobby, book, and music stores also have a long inventory period. If I put these are the different industries that I had on that previous chart. If I put them out, put them out on a graph here with the days of inventory going along the x-axis and days payable on the y-axis, it would look like this. And as you can see, it seems to be this would be net 30. So most of the industries are beyond net 30. Motor vehicles is the one outlier, but the other ones seem to line up relatively well. And in fact, we get a fairly strong indication of a linear relationship, even including the motor vehicles in this case. And it almost looks like consignment. So if we just allowed If we just had the goods being owned by the supplier until they're actually sold, then that would look like this green line. So it's, it's not quite consignment, although some industries almost look like they're doing consignment, in that the days of inventory and the days of payable are almost exactly matching up. Okay, so